For coming, for being in the room today, and good afternoon to the second session of the fall semester's Education Policy Colloquium Series, sponsored by the Program in Education Policy and Governance. My name is Jim Pizer. I'm an academic visitor here at the Kennedy School. And until January, I was Secretary of Education in Massachusetts within the Baker administration. And it's a pleasure to be working beside Paul Peterson, who's here with us today, as well as Marty West here at Harvard. In addition to today's event, we've got at least 7 more sessions that are confirmed through the end of November. Most of them, I think all of them actually, on Thursdays at noon here in Taubman. And the upcoming topics include school finance, accountability, charter schools, and parental choice. So we got a full schedule. It's all on the PEPG website. So please check it out and mark your calendars. And our next session is Thursday, October 5th. So not next week, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we're off next week, right? But a week after, and it'll feature Michelle Rhee, who's the former chancellor of schools in Washington, D.C., and George Parker, who's currently a senior advisor with the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools, but during Michelle's tenure as chancellor was the former head of the D.C. Teachers Union. And the two of them will be talking about their unusual experience, maybe unique, with the collective bargaining process back in 2010 as a means to meaningful reform within the district. Anyway, I hope you'll all be able to join us for that session. Today's session is also somewhat unusual because unfortunately at the last minute, our speaker, Robin Lake, was unable to join us in person. So she'll be joining us today, as you can see, via Zoom. I'm sad that Robin is not here in the room and that she can't enjoy the free food. It's pizza today, if you were wondering, if you can sort of smell the pepperoni, that's what that is. But we're really glad that she could still join the program anyway. Robin is director of the Center on Reinventing Public Education, and her presentation today is entitled The State of the American Student Fall 2023, which is based on SERPI's most recent and widely anticipated annual report by the same name, which has just been released. The headline from the report is, quoting it, is we are failing the COVID generation. It's time to change course. And in particular, the report raises concerns about older students who have the least time to catch up. Her presentation today is particularly timely here in Massachusetts because just 2 days ago, our own MCAS state testing results were released from last spring. And the results are very consistent with her report's findings. Just over 40% of students in grades 3 through 8 are meeting or exceeding expectations in English and math, which is up slightly from last year, but only slightly, and about 8 to 10 percentage points below 2019 pre-COVID. Although interestingly, this year's 10th grade results are only marginally below 2019, which may be in part due to the fact that they didn't drop nearly as much as the 3 through 8th grade results did, which is also perhaps related to the fact that the 10th grade test is part of our graduation requirement, which, by the way, happens to be the subject of a potential ballot initiative here in 2024. After Robin's comments, we should have ample time for questions and answers and hopefully some discussion. And although we'll give priority to folks here in the room, we'll also try to involve the folks who are dialing in on Zoom. So if you are calling in online, please put your questions into the chat, and we'll do our best to get to them and include them in the conversation as time allows. Also, for the record, the session is being recorded and will be posted on the PEPG website. So in effect, we're all on the record today. And with that, it's my privilege to turn the program over to Robin Lake. Take it away, Robin.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Apologies to all. I was struck with COVID, so it's just a good reminder we're not out of the woods on this yet, but making the best of it. So very pleased to join you all to talk about the state of the American student. Let me share my screen and we'll get to some data. Okay. Can you all see the presentation?
No, we can't. Yes.
Aha, great. All right, so as Jim mentioned, this is a report that we started as an annual report. Last year was the debut. The goal is really to take a moment before the start of the school year, at the start of the school year, to take stock, to stand back and take a look through all the various reports that have been released throughout the past year, the evidence that's been gathered, and do some sense making, sort through it all, try to put together a picture of how kids have been affected by the pandemic, how they're faring now, and most importantly, what do we need to make sure that they're made whole before they go on to life. So that's the goal of this, this report. This year, in addition to doing just kind of a broad landscape scan and some data on all fronts and all grades, we wanted to zoom in on this question of older students. Time is ticking for them. It seemed really urgent to really zoom in to the question of how they're doing. And so that's what we've done this year. So this is, if you had time to dig into the report, there's really a lot here. We've got a lot of data. We've got this deep dive into older students. We've also put together some perspectives from youth. We thought it would be really important, especially for older students, to hear what they're thinking about, what they say they need. So we included their perspectives. And additionally, we commissioned some expert essays. We asked people to stand back from their perspectives and bring their ideas for how we move forward effectively. I will say this can be a depressing endeavor. Looking at these data, it's sobering. That's the word that people use most often. We wanted to make sure that that we point to bright spots, to really great examples. There are many out there, so we've included quite a few of those. All right, so here we are. It is now, what, 3.5 years or so after the pandemic began. And I find that it's a very strange time. On the one hand, it feels like normal again. Kids are back in school, kids are graduating, many kids are getting great grades, great report cards home. We all want things to be back to normal, but what we're finding, what's really clear, is that we're not back to normal. The pandemic is continuing to derail learning. New data are coming in to that effect on a regular basis. It's just a more, less obvious picture, kind of more insidious, more hidden. We have to look harder to find the challenges and to really see them. That is especially true for older students. And so most of the testing is done in grades 3 through 8. It's harder to find data, especially national data on older students. There's a national exam called NAEP. The best we can do there is 13-year-olds. And so these questions are really seriously underreported, underaddressed in our view. But what our report is showing is that all of the available indicators are concerning, and they're pointing in the direction of declining college readiness, and really importantly as well, to staggering and worsening inequalities. And so that's some of the data that I'll show you. We also are really concerned, want to really raise the flag, that we see the wind going out of the sails on academic recovery, just at a time when things are about to get much worse, much harder for schools and teachers. So I'll talk about some of that as well. Jim said we're calling for a course correction. I don't know how to say it more clearly. We must change course. This is what I believe is slow-moving train wreck with really specific and real consequences for young people, for our economy, for society, and it really need not be that way. There are things that we can do right now to change course. So let's talk about some of that. All right, so some of the data, as I said, multiple indicators. We've got a lot of pieces of the puzzle that we've been piecing together, looking at different district reports, state reports, national data where available. And what they're showing us is that it's really clear. High school students have been failing courses at much higher rates. during the course of the pandemic, and that's going to have long-term consequences for those kids unless something is done. ACT scores are way down. Now, not everybody takes the ACT score, so that's not a nationally representative sample, but of the students who do take the ACT, they're not scoring as high. Absenteeism, chronic absenteeism rates have doubled during the pandemic. Very alarming that kids are just not attending school at the same rates that they usually do. And student engagement by multiple indicators is declining. Students are just not as focused, not as present. Ask any teacher, they're seeing it in their classrooms. At the same time, we're seeing this strange reality in that graduation rates have gone up. Grades are continuing to increase. It's tempting to think that's a good sign. We think it's a sign actually that many students have already graduated unprepared for college and career. We're starting to see some indicators to that effect as it's playing out. College enrollment and retention rates have also taken a hit, especially among lower income students, especially at the community college level. So again, it's not looking good. Let me go back to some basics here, just in terms of academic results. As I say, it's hard to get nationally representative data on high school students, but here you can see some significant decline over the past 5 years in both math and green and reading. This is the Renaissance STAR test. It's a 10th grade math and reading scores here. And as Jim said, we're starting to see this play out in state test results that are rolling in. People have talked about the fear of a K-shaped recovery in the sense that some kids may rebound quickly when their parents are able to find them the resources, the tutoring, the help to be able to bounce back quickly, and many students will not. That is playing out in every report that I've looked at on just about every indicator, whether it's the grade inflation question, the course failure question, absenteeism, enrollment, retention, every which way, we have a highly unequal recovery prospect, which should be very, very concerning to us for many reasons. All right, I'll give you a little bit of a sense. As I say, we presented lots of different avenues. Here, we're just looking at the students receiving an F grade in the green. ELL, that's English language learners versus not, low income versus not, students with disabilities versus not. And here, just another look at the question of who received an F. You can see this by year. So 2019, 2018, 2019, 2020, the concerning gaps, which I've started referring to, frankly, as chasms. I think they're getting there. So, those data and many others are really, really sobering. But again, one of the reasons we're really raising the alarm here is we do not believe we're on track to catch kids up. And there are many reasons that I believe that. One of them is that tutoring, the intervention that just about every researcher I know knows is the most effective way to catch kids up quickly. High quality tutoring, in intensive bursts and regular basis in a coordinated fashion is not happening to the extent that it needs to happen. There's no perfect data source on that, but in terms of the number of American students whose parents say they're getting high quality tutoring is 2%. One district that Tom Kane at Harvard and his colleagues looked at showed that the number of kids who qualified for tutoring and who were intended to get tutoring didn't pan out in reality. A very, very small portion of them actually got tutoring. There are a number of reasons for that, which Jim, we can talk through. But this is just an obvious and missed opportunity. I'm not sure why we're not doing this, and we need to shift. Another dynamic at play is I think parents don't understand that there's a problem. This is a survey from Learning Heroes, a national survey showing that about 90% of parents believe that their kid is above or at grade level right now. Is not the case. So there's a serious belief gap between parents and students and what the data show. And so it's hard to make a step at recovery if we don't first admit there's a problem and make sure that students and families know what's going on. Another, just huge factor I think we're all aware of is mental health concerns, social emotional needs, just overall student welfare. Not good. We can look at, again, multiple indicators, sadness, hopelessness among high school students, anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. Those rates were heading up before the pandemic. But they're persistent. Some experts believe they're mounting, and that's always going to be should be an important concern for all of us. It's also something that will interfere with academic progress long term. And my last kind of bit of bad news is I think we're actually at the best of times right now. We've got a lot of federal dollars. We've had a lot of momentum for trying to talk about academic loss and try to address it. And I think that things are about to get much worse. There's something of a perfect storm brewing. Enrollment declines are an important dynamic in a lot of school districts around the country now. That combined with the expiration of federal funds and the fiscal cliff that's looming is likely to put a lot of school districts into a very, very difficult position, and add to that staffing challenges that they've already been experiencing for the past several years, and we're beginning again before the pandemic, are really going to combine to be a serious challenge. And this is coming all at a time when, the economy, the future of work, the rise of AI, societal shifts and uncertainty are all coming to play. So we need this generation of students to be at their best. They're our problem solvers. They're the leaders of the future. They're the people who are going to help us get through the next round of hard times. And I do believe that we're failing them. So I'll wrap up by just saying, there are some things we could do right now to shift course. We could start with transparency, real data to families about how their kids are doing. We could really start investing heavily in proven interventions like high quality tutoring and mentoring. We know that these things work: more time on task, high quality curriculum. Why aren't we scaling them? Let's figure out what's getting in the way and ask states and the federal government to come to the table to do it right and to do it at large scale, make sure that every student who needs it gets access. I'm really cognizant that so many students have already left the K-12 system or are about to, and they just, we know they're not going to get caught up in time. So could we think creatively about gap year programs, not necessarily launching into college right away, but maybe using our community colleges that are struggling with enrollment to think about how to address academic remediation, think about counseling toward college and helping kids get back on track, addressing any mental health needs that they have in really serious and creative ways. I'm not sure that alone is exactly the right thing. I know that Tom Kane has proposed a 5th year of high school, which is kind of a similar idea, but we really can't give up on these kids. We can't just say, well, they're through and done and good luck to them. We've got to do something. And then in terms of creativity, I think we now is the time to think about how we can leverage AI, how we can leverage really kind of community assets, think about an all hands on deck moment to test out new strategies for interventions and also making the job of teaching much, much easier. I also will just call one of the essays in our report came out of the UK, where they're doing a long-term study on COVID kids, tracking their long-term outcomes. I really think we have to be doing that, keep our eye on how students are doing longer term and what we can do to help them wherever they are. And finally, a lot of the work that we've been doing over the last year or two has been around the mantra, like, the kids are not all right, but they weren't all right before. And so, we need to take this time to rebuild in a better way. One of the things that we could do right now is start investing in new models of high school that really blur the line between high school, college, and career, and make learning a lot more relevant, joyful, meaningful, and effective for older students. It's really time. So I won't get into all the different kind of ideas and bright spots that are out there, but I will say there are a lot of them. There are a lot of states that are coming to the table and being really honest about where their kids are, talking about the data, talking about how money is being spent, how it isn't being spent, investing in new models, and great schools that are reimagining high school right now, universities that are thinking about how to really better serve the kids that are coming in with very different needs, ways to not make choices between academics and social emotional learning, but figure out how to do both. We can do it. And how to prepare kids for the future and in really effective ways. So there's a lot of good stuff out there. The essays in our report are really fun to read, chock full of great examples, inspiring examples. And so it's a long report, but I think it's worth your time. So hopefully it'll be helpful. So I will turn it back to you, Jim, and let's take the conversation wherever you think it's most useful.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Robin. Thank you very much. That was really full of information, not all of it uplifting or happy. As you said, we're in a challenging time, which may be a slow motion train wreck, but you gave us a little hope at the end that maybe, someone's going to shift the tracks at the end, and we're not going to crash into each other. But nonetheless, it's pretty tough. It's a pretty tough moment, and I think trying to confront that directly is at least the first step towards doing something about it. But sort of on that point, I don't know if this is a political issue or something else, but I think on the one hand, there's a general recognition that test scores have gone down. And that COVID is certainly, a critical or central part of reason for that. A lot of it having to do with, the kind of instruction that occurred or didn't occur during COVID, whether it was in person or online, and a lot of other things. But at the same time, it seems to me there's also a narrative out there which has always been present, but maybe growing in its in terms of the traction that it's gaining, which is that academic achievement and sort of standardized measures of academic achievement don't really matter or don't tell the whole picture or a meaningful part of the picture. And that what we really ought to be focused on are other things besides whether students are performing well on assessments, NAEP or otherwise, in English language arts or math or what have you. And that also, at the same time, these issues of mental and behavioral health are far more important and far more challenging, and in fact, may be in tension with a focus on academic achievement, because that may ramp up sort of the pressure, if you will, on students and the anxiety levels. Anyway, all of that's sort of a long-winded way of asking, to what extent do you think people generally, political folks and educators in particular, are actually feeling this sense of urgency that we have to do something to recoup the lost academic achievement and performance that we seem to have experienced, and in particular is measured by NAEP and state assessments?
Well, it's really concerning. I think that people don't feel the urgency. No, I think there are a lot of reasons for that. Every parent knows that mental health concerns are real, and if you've got a child who's talking and thinking about suicide, everything else needs to be set back, and the mental health struggles among kids are real. But I think that it's very, very dangerous territory to say that academics don't matter at all in that mix. There may be times where kids are in crisis, where we need some urgent intervention for them, and certainly classrooms need to be a lot more joyful. Schools need to be a lot more humane. Students have been disengaging for a while. They are they're bored. They're not loving school. So we need to attend to all those things. But I think it's very, very dangerous when I see schools and school districts saying the way to help kids right now is to ease off on everything, to ease off on high expectations, to ease off on grading, to let kids turn assignments in late. That is becoming much more prevalent. The grade inflation that we're seeing, all that, is not going to serve kids well long term. They're not going to be in a good state of well-being if they graduate without the opportunities that other kids have, and their lives can't be all that they dream they could be. So I'll just give you one kind of turn into a study that we did, a report that we put out about 3 months ago as part of our American School District panel. It's a partnership with RAND. And we've been tracking a number of school districts over the course of the pandemic, asking them about what's happening with learning loss. One of the really concerning things that we learned from those interviews is that school districts are reporting that they're having to go back to basics around high expectations, what it means to be a great instructor, that not only did kids really fall back in learning during the pandemic, but teacher quality fell back for many different reasons. But Jim, honestly, reading through those transcripts, those interviews, I thought, the NAEP scores have fallen back decades. Also, our classrooms in some ways seem to have fallen back decades in terms of the commitment to data, the belief that all kids really can learn to high levels. And so the confluence of the pandemic hit to learning and the dissolution, I think, or significant weakening of commitment to standards and accountability systems is very dangerous territory. And I don't mean to say that in the sense that we need to go back 30 years and where we were. We need to keep evolving in our commitments to those things. But I think we're in a very bad state right now.
Thank you. Let me open it up to folks in the room if you've got any questions for Robin. Happy to. Oh, Paul.
So Robin, I've often thought the high school was a broken institution, even before COVID, that somehow kids have become too diverse to be placed in a very large building. with maybe thousands of other students. And your proposals here are interesting, but you haven't really sort of said we have to redesign the high school system from the ground up. And I'm wondering if you would embrace that idea that we have to give people a choice of high school, and the high school's got to be very different from one another, and they have to be very focused. And people, when they go to that high school, they know what they're going to be into at that high school, and the high school will be coherent and have a sense of community and have a specific mission. And how would you respond to a much more, urgent, fundamental restructuring of the last years of high school?
I'm for it. And in fact, I've got an essay in our report that's calling for a new American high school. So I'm now affiliated with ASU. President Michael Crow is well known for creating the new American University. And so I kind of played with the idea of, what would it take to create the new American high school, really? There's a lot of talk about, more career relevant programming, that kind of thing. That's great, but the work ahead is fundamental, as you allude to. And this is not the first time we've talked about reimagining high school, and the first time anybody has said the American high school is broken. There have been many reform efforts around high school. We actually can't give up. Now is the time, and I think it will take a large-scale effort, a national effort, at least state efforts, to say, look, this is an outdated institution. It's not working for most kids. What could we do? And certainly, I'm a believer that coherency matters, that you can't have effective high schools that are everything to everybody. You just cannot. And so, yes, I mean, the high schools that I think we've got in our report, many of them have high degrees of autonomy from their school districts, and were able to craft something from the ground up that was really innovative, creative, and that made sure that they were, communicating to families what they were and what they weren't. And that requires some degree of choice. And we just, the challenge before us is, as always, how do we do it with equity at the center? How do we create that autonomy for schools at a time when the spaces for innovation in public education, like the charter school space, have been kind of diminishing, struggling, not being very well funded, not prospering. And so, yeah, we got to get going, but it's a big deal.
I'm curious to learn a little bit more about the federal funding cliff, and specifically how you see that impacting schools and school districts in terms of, where has the funding been going? Is it primarily towards capital purchases, or have folks hired staff that they'll now be needing to cut? I just would love a little bit more specificity about that impact.
Yes. Well, you got it. So unprecedented federal dollars came into school districts at a time when they really didn't, fully grasp maybe the scope of the problem, and were really underwater in terms of crisis management. And I think that in times of crisis, people tend to just do what they know. They're holding fast to the steering wheel. You're driving along the highway, you get splashed by a big truck, hold tight. It makes sense. And so, yes, the money has gone to things that were, shovel ready. Deferred maintenance is often something. There were some investments that had to be made in air filtration systems, and some good things for the health and well-being of kids and the adults who work in schools. But staffing is always the place where money is spent in public education, and that's where the federal dollars have gone. We interviewed some folks for our district study that I talked about earlier, and some expressed real regret for putting money into things like teacher signing bonuses. Districts were so desperate to get and keep teachers for the past few years that they were trying everything. But they found that putting money into bonuses just wasn't effective in keeping people. They weren't able to, and that it, obviously wasn't sustainable. So yeah, it's gonna be a big problem. People like Margaret Rosa have been yelling about this for a long time. The money should go into things that can be sustained, long-term investments. Reimagining high school, now's a great time to use money for that, but it didn't. So that again is combined with the fact that many districts will be dealing with declining enrollment, which means less money for them. We're going to see layoffs, and we're going to see layoffs done the way that they are always done, which is last in, first out. Those kinds of dynamics have a tendency to put districts into a downward spiral where their instruction is suffering, and they lose more and more students because the quality of their educational offerings are going downhill. So we don't want to see that. There's still some time before federal money runs out. Now, this year is a great year for folks who are in a position to make changes, to say, how can we use this last tranche of money in really, really effective, sustainable ways? But we're not there yet.
Rob, can I just follow up quickly on your last comment there, your last word, which is sustainable ways. So if you've got money that is going to run out in a year, and in Massachusetts, for example, basically half the money has been spent so far, which means there's a lot of money left over, but it's one-time money and it's short-term money now. What are some states or districts or schools, for that matter, doing with short-term money that can actually be sustainable? Because a lot of certainly the initial idea behind the federal money was it's one-time money. It's going to fill funding holes that may emerge because of a collapsing economy and state revenues. It'll be used for upgrades to, as we said, let's call them COVID-related capital expenses and things like that. But now they've got a year. They may have a bunch of money. What can they do with it that will actually be sustainable, as opposed to something that will be a 1 year, one-time, one-off?
We have built a database called the Edu Recovery Hub in partnership with the Collaborative for Student Success. And we went through the federal spending plans, and we pulled out the things that seemed most promising and had them reviewed by groups of experts to put their stamp of approval on them. So there's a whole database of really great ideas out there. And they include things like states that have invested in research and innovation at the same time. So they've set up an infrastructure to understand how is money being spent, what's working well, and get that information out to a lot of people. So that those kinds of big infrastructure investments, I think, are going to be great long term. They help build a knowledge base about what's working and what's not. And they give advocates a tool for going out and saying, hey, this isn't working, let's stop it. Or why aren't you doing this thing that this neighboring district is doing? I think that's a great move. There are also many states and districts that were thinking about making this shift to more career relevant learning. So building up infrastructure for internships, apprenticeships, partnerships between higher education, business, and the K-12 school systems. That's playing out in a lot of different ways around the country, but gets to this question of kind of reimagining high school. And so, happy to see that. Tutoring programs that are more than just one-off, so that are starting to build the foundation to be built into the community long-term. We work with, we're a research partner to a group called the Oakland Reach in Oakland, California. They are partnering with the Oakland School District to train up parents to be long-term paid tutors in Oakland public schools. If it works, it's going to be a real win-win for parents and students as they become better able to advocate for their own kids, better able to understand what high quality curriculum looks like. It's just a really fascinating program, but just one of many examples of how we can get creative in this moment to leverage community in new ways that could be long lasting.
Great, thank you. Other questions?
Hi, Robin. Jim Flanagan. Thanks for keeping the brutal facts in front of us, along with some innovative ideas. Want to build on both the high school redesign element and maybe some of the funding piece. Have you seen enough funding invested in instructional redesign based on the science of learning? And if not, what do we have to do so we're not creating an everlasting gap between what we know about instructional delivery and what's actually being done in the classroom?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much of it is enough. Nobody does, I guess, but we do know that many schools and school systems around the country are still not implementing what we know works around literacy, and that is just wrong. We know a lot right now, and still in classrooms around the country, they're still using outdated and ineffective approaches to basic skill building. So that's a problem, and there's a lot of money that should be going into kind of training and supporting teachers in figuring out how to differentiate instruction, meet kids' needs, or kids' needs are just all over the place. They always have been, but they're more so now, and that's a pretty tricky skill, but one that every teacher really needs to be able to master. I am heartened to know that a lot of people are beginning to talk about new technologies, especially AI, as a way to help teachers to be able to do that. And that, I think, is an example, Jim, of how we could be investing money in potentially a leapfrog solution right now, rather than spending a lot of time training up teachers into how to group kids in a classroom. Could we think about what new technologies could catapult us forward? Because honestly, the one teacher, 30 kid or 50 kid model in some places is just not tenable, especially when you layer on the mental health needs of kids and of all the different dynamics going on in classrooms. So strategies to employ technology in new ways, strategies to reimagine how we staff schools. My colleagues at ASU in the Next Education Workforce Initiative have been experimenting with ways to help teachers specialize, to teach in teams like you might encounter in the medical field, ways to use community educators and leverage their expertise and resources in the classroom in a really coordinated and effective way. So, that's where my eye is on those potential leapfrog solutions, because we've got to change the dynamic, get out of the box that's really killing us right now.
Thanks.
Can I follow up just on the teaching and learning or instructional side? And I don't think this is unique to Massachusetts, but the Department of Education in Massachusetts provided a whole lot of guidance for schools and for educators to provide grade level instruction with scaffolded supports in order to not simply do remediation for lost learning that occurred during COVID. There are other people who think the opposite approach is the way to go, that what we really need to do is we need to accelerate learning that was missed in order to get them up to a point where they can access the grade level instruction that ultimately they will need. But that may take some, number of years, as opposed to do grade level instruction now and try to scaffold around the remediation, if you will, as needed along the way. Any thoughts based on what you're seeing else going around the country about which sort of general approach works, or whether that's sort of the wrong way of thinking about it?
Most of the school districts that we've been tracking closely around learning loss strategies committed to the idea that they call acceleration. So the kind of just-in-time interventions with kids, keeping them in the grade level courses, keeping them, moving along quickly. And one of the superintendents we talked to said, look, this is how we teach our gifted courses. This is how we should teach all of our courses. And there's a lot of evidence to that. TNTP and Johns Hopkins have done evidence gathering showing that when implemented well, that's a really, really effective strategy for kids. The problem that we're seeing is that it's very hard to pull off. And folks will admit that it's probably, if you're starting from scratch, it's probably a 5-year endeavor to get your schools to be able to do this thing really well. And the school districts that we've been tracking have kind of largely given up on that strategy because they just can't pull it off. It requires so much professional development. Teachers are burnt out. They're not wanting to do something new right now. They're not wanting to attend professional development courses outside of their regular school day. And there's so many new teachers coming in without the basics of a good instruction and classroom management. And so our school districts are really, many of them are really struggling with these kinds of concepts, which is why I keep coming back to, hey, we've got to get out of the box. We've got to figure out how to leverage technology to really strategically target kids who are most in need and figure out solutions for them, make the job of teaching a lot easier right now, take away some of the tasks that are not high payoff tasks for teachers so that they can do this well.
Other questions? Do we have any online? I see something in the chat there.
Want me to read it?
Yeah, why don't you read it, Michael? I can't see it.
So Mary Lasky asks, your mention of declining teacher quality earlier made me wonder how you think the state of the student interacts with the state of the teacher. Can we improve the state of the student without improving the state of the teaching profession?
Yes, thanks, Mary. Mary just joined our center, so really, really happy to have Mary on board. Yes. We have to do both, and we try to really stay focused on what students and families need right now, but we cannot do this without engaging teachers in fundamental ways and figuring out how to meet their needs. They are really overwhelmed. They are really exhausted. They really have, in some cases, very, very difficult situations in front of them. And so yeah, the investments have to go into making the job of teaching tenable, and not only tenable, but also joyful. Teachers, we did a study of pandemic learning pods in the heart of the pandemic. And one of the most surprising findings from that study was not only, it didn't surprise me that families said they love pods. It was a lot of fun for kids. They were able to run around and release their energy, go out and learn in nature, and lots of cool things, have more individualized instruction. But what surprised me was that teachers said, this is why I got into teaching in the first place, to be able to build relationships with kids, know what kids needed, to be able to craft solutions for that unique child in front of me, And many of those teachers that we interviewed chose not to go back to teaching in their school district when that was a possibility. They instead chose to go into things like tutoring, where they could maintain those one-on-one relationships with kids. So this, I guess my point is this goes far beyond just more PD courses for teachers. As I say, the teacher supply challenge, teacher retention challenge was coming long before the pandemic. And so now is the time to think about how do we rethink our schools to make them attractive places for students and teachers. Again, so that's the work ahead.
We've talked a lot about schools, we've talked a lot about students, we've even talked about states and districts. The big gorilla in the room is the feds. What can the federal government constructively do for us? And we all still have, well, many of us still have this bad taste in our mouth from No Child Left Behind. So I know it's a carrot and stick game, but they have resources and they have some expertise and they can play that carrot and stick game. How can we get them to leverage their resources to help, not to sort of bully, but to help?
Yeah. Well, that is a great question. First, they do have a bully pulpit, and they should be using it to be honest with folks about where we are, to be talking about the challenges and lifting up solutions. Next, providing money to get the kinds of new school models and new innovations going, tested. I think the feds have been pretty successful in helping to start up many charter schools over the years through the charter schools program. Investing in R&D. Those are really good areas. But the elephant in the room, I think, is accountability and transparency and commitment to solid measures of how schools are doing. And that's a big question in, I think, the ed reform community now is, where will the federal government go on that next, and how can it be productive? I think we've got to go there, and with great leadership, we can come to some sort of basic agreement about what kids need and whether we're giving them what they need.
Thank you.
You mentioned the gap year idea, and you said Tom Kane was promoting that idea.
Yeah, a little bit different.
class.
Tom's promoting a fifth year of high school. I'm saying
High school. Okay, yes.
Whatever.
So maybe picking up on that theme a little bit. Unfortunately, and I think you've acknowledged this, all the things that you've talked about doing that are sort of more transformative or innovative are very challenging to do in the context of the bureaucracy of public education, of collective bargaining agreements, of all the things that we've been sort of struggling with and dealing with for decades that have made reform and changes so difficult and slow. I'm wondering if, and forget about money for a second, because all of these things may be limited or unrealistic on the basis of available resources. But what if we sort of shifted focus to be more about what can we do during the summer or during out of school time to provide access to some of the innovative different approaches that may be hard to implement within an existing structure or existing organization, and doing it in a way that is outside of the existing system. So summer is one of those places where, obviously there are summer school programs that are operated by school districts, but there are a lot of summer programs that are operated completely outside of a school district and outside of all kind of constraints associated with it. I don't have a big idea here other than, is there something that we could or should be doing differently to think about summer as the way in which we provide additional learning time for students who aren't getting it, and the kinds of experiences that will be more engaging and more productive for students long term.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. There was some energy around summer school programs for a while, and some of that continues. There are some terrific programs out there. The National Summer School Institute has some good data behind it. I think they have they had a partnership going with New York City Public Schools over this last summer, many others. And there are also programs that have given grants directly to families, Indiana, to just go out and get the tutoring that they need. If the school district can't stand up a tutoring program, just, give the money directly to families and create an infrastructure for them to be able to tap into. And that's serving a lot of families right now. Time really matters for kids. They lost a lot of time. And so any way that we can creatively look at how they're using their time and how we can attend to their needs. After school providers really stepped up during the pandemic. Many of them, especially in urban areas, were the place where kids were going during the day to do their virtual learning. And they were providing tutoring and supports and social emotional care for kids and learning about how kids learn. Many places actually prohibit after-school providers from providing instruction, which seems slightly crazy to me. Why would we do that? And so, that seems like easy pickings as well. But again, I kind of come back to this challenge of parents don't know there's a problem, and so too many don't. And so too often when we're offering these opportunities, parents aren't signing up for them because they're getting A's, their kids are getting A's. Why would they sign up for a summer school program if their kids are getting A's or B's? And so I think all of this has to be paired with really educating families about where their kids are, why it's urgent that they participate in those kinds of offerings if they're out of school. And, of course, we can't give up on school. That's where kids are for the majority of their day. And all these kinds of programs are really most effective when they're coordinated with a core instructional strategy. So ideally, I think, yes, we leverage these outside of school spaces, but ideally we do it in a manner that's really coordinated so that a teacher says, hey, we still have not been able to conquer these math skills. And so, essentially I'm writing a prescription for this kinds of support outside of school. Here are a set of funds that are available to you if you want to do it directly. Here are some programs out in the community if you want to participate in those. And we build up a whole infrastructure of supports. But I think the core has to be really a portrait of how this child is doing, what's been tried so far, what else is available that could be tried.
Other questions? Yes,
on that
please.
a little bit. Seems a lot of times we jump to time dependent or time related solutions. Whether it's tutoring, after school, summer, and wouldn't we be better to offset and say before we jump, because I would say there's an offset in student social emotional anxiety, just be having spent more time doing academic work. Would it be better if we offset and said, before we look at time, let's look at structure, and I would say competency based as an example. So instead of jumping to students spend more time, what if we let the competency drive and the time had to follow?
Yes, again, a shift that's hard to pull off, a shift that's worth making to more competency-based grading and assessment and instructional strategies. Many school districts are trying to make that shift right now, but it's a tricky one. I would also say that that playing with the assumptions of what the school day looks like right now is important. So there are schools and school districts that have shifted the schedule to accommodate for more time on math if needed, et cetera. So kind of playing with the assumptions of what school is, how we're delivering, but certainly, I mean, we have to have strategic use of time. I think that's really what you're getting at with that question. Strategic use of time has to be informed by clear information about where are the gaps and where are the gaps that have to be addressed most immediately for this child. So that's tricky territory as well. And that's where school districts really could use help from states to develop those kinds of data systems, whether it's around competency, whether it's around new assessment systems, whether it's around alert systems. This is where I think tools like AI, are pretty nascent still, but could be transformational for our schools and our efforts to meet student needs effectively. If we have really good, clear information coming in and intervention strategies at our hands that either our schools or parents could do directly inside or outside of school.
Anything else, either in the chat or in the room? Well, Robin, and I know you've been trying to be upbeat and hopeful throughout it all, but any sort of concluding and hopeful remarks you want to make in the end before we go?
I mean, well, I would say, Jim, I mean, been in this work for a long time, and I think that the most hopeful thing that I feel right now is a consensus that what we've been doing isn't working, that the way that we've built our public education structures really hardwire inequality. The way that we've set up staffing models do not set up educators for success. And the way that we fund schools isn't right and good. Accountability systems have to be revamped. And new models of learning are needed. And I've never heard it so strongly from school systems themselves and from educators. That's what feels really new to me. There's always been a cadre of people saying, hey, things need to change. I think it's really prevalent right now. Nobody feels that this is working well. And so, the opportunity before us is great. If we do this right, this is a transformational time for public education where we really figure out how to do it right for all kids. And it's not rocket science. I had, in part of my slide, we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. These ideas are big and tricky, but they're not crazy. They're really the right things to do for kids and for educators. And there are models out there. This is a time for leadership. It really feels to me. And, so, it's an honor to be at the Kennedy School where, the policy leaders of the future are getting ready to go. I think us old timers, are here to help, but the future is young people's, and so I'm excited to see what they will invent.
Well, that was very well done. I'm feeling hopeful now. So excellent. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for making the effort to join us, even though you couldn't be here in person. Again, we missed you not being in the room, but we were really glad and to hear what you had to say and learned a lot from it. So thank you so much, Robin. I appreciate it.
I enjoyed it a lot. Thanks so much.
All right, take care. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
And remember, not next week, but the week after.